It is my belief that the hardest move to make is to move to a new place that is within sight of our old place. To move to the neighboring house, or to the house that's just down the street from where we currently live. These are the worst moves to make because nobody rents a truck to move 100 yards. Instead, we end up with a Toyota Corolla, a few hand trucks, and some miscellaneous boxes that we're trying to shuffle across the street. Things that would be carefully padded and boxed up for a cross-country move or even a cross-city move fall victim to the, well, we're just going right there. Let's just carry it mindset, which is fine until you do it 300 times. And then you start to question your sanity. Having done both of these, I will say that a big move, a cross-town move or a cross-country move, is almost always easier to make than the little move down the road. Still, usually these little moves, they're happening. They're happening because there's something about our current place that just doesn't fit our needs anymore. There's something about our current place that doesn't work for us anymore. But we like the neighborhood in general. We like where we are. But there's something about our specific place that just doesn't fit us anymore. It's too small, or it's too big. It has too many stairs, or too many barriers, or barriers to entry even. Or maybe it's just no longer hospitable for us. But because we love the neighborhood, we love the community we're in, we aren't looking to move out of town or across country. We're just looking to find another place that fits our needs a little bit better in this same city block or community. And so we find ourselves pushing a hand truck full of boxes down the street to a new place, which hopefully fits our needs a little bit more. Beginning 2 weeks ago and continuing through Palm Sunday, we are moving with God. As Lent began, we moved with God into the desert, and then last week we moved with God past all obstacles. Today we're going to make that short and difficult move down the road with God, and then next week we'll witness how God moves in some mysterious ways. As April begins, we will find some new smells as we move around with God. And then finally on Palm Sunday, we will move with God and animals and all creatures of our God and King. Along the way, we've been stopping at some scenic overlooks, we've met a few new people, we've reunited with a few friends, and we've broken a few habits, or broken a few patterns at least, because it's not really a move if we don't break something. Through it all this Lent, we are witnessing how God's movement in the world goes with us in our lives and in our respective ministries. Through Jesus' Lenten journey, we are discovering how fear and reassurance, doubt and confidence, grief and celebration work through us and keep us always on the move with God. The Reverend Jessica Legrone has allowed me to use her general structure for this Lenten God on the Move sermon series. However, unless otherwise cited, the images used, the stories told, the scriptural interpretations, and all other reflections are my own work. Let's move. Everyone had their own reason for coming to Jesus. Some were there because they wanted to question him. Some came to Jesus because they sought health or healing or wholeness. Some came to Jesus because they needed inclusion and hospitality. And in today's passage, some were present because a particular aspect of what religion had taught them no longer fit for them. In his parable, Jesus offered them an understanding of God. It was greener and greater and just down the road from where they were currently living. Their hesitation is a little obvious, that their boxes were packed and ready to go far away. They were ready to go and worship the Roman gods. They were ready to go and leave religion behind entirely. Yet Jesus promised to help them with what turns out to be a more difficult journey, to, instead of leaving everything behind, that maybe they can make this smaller move with him down the road to a new understanding of how God could fit in their lives today. And his parable was designed to ask them if they were simply willing to invest one more time in what had come to feel to them like a worthless fig tree of religion. We don't actually know what they decided to do. The parable doesn't tell us what their decision was. What we do know is that Jesus promised to help them and to help us with the difficult, short move down the road. Some people were present specifically because what religion had taught them about the connection between sin and fate no longer worked for them. The connection between sin and fate simply was a barrier that they could not get past. They showed up and they reminded Jesus about the blood of the innocent Galileans whom Pontius Pilate had executed. And then in a peak of Roman anger, Pontius Pilate had religiously desecrated those victims by mixing their blood with animal blood. They had been taught that the sins of those Galileans had caused this awful fate. But that didn't fit their lives or their understanding of a God of love. Jesus replied to this question that they asked him about the Galileans. He replied by reminding them of another disaster. The Tower of Siloam, which stood adjacent to the Jerusalem temple, had recently collapsed, and 18 innocent people had been killed. Had the 18 done something to deserve that fate, Jesus asked? The temple leaders said they had. And Jesus answered his own question. No, they did nothing to deserve that fate. The image of innocent blood mixing with animal blood may feel a bit foreign to most of us. But the image of innocent people being killed when a tower collapses, of people who did nothing to deserve that fate, that image is powerful in our own lives. For many, the bigger move is the easier move. If they didn't cause it, and God didn't prevent it, why bother with religion at all? That's true in our family and personal lives, too. If the tragedies that we experience aren't because of our own actions, and apparently God is not preventing every diagnosis or disaster or drunk driver that careens into our lives, then what are we doing here? The bigger move is the easier move. Let's pack all of this up and move away from religion entirely. Some people were with Jesus because that's the point that they were at. Jesus offered them a shorter, yet substantially harder move. He offered the same God, but a new theology. The same God, but a new expression of faith. The same God, but a new understanding of how we are to be God's people in the world. He told a story. There was a man who had planted a fig tree in his vineyard, which is odd because vineyards are for grapes, not for fig trees. But there it was, just taking up perfectly good soil and water and sucking the life out of everything else around it. As an added insult, it never even bore fruit. 3 years it stood there in this man's vineyard, worthless, wasteful, a wound in this man's world that he could not look past. He'd had enough. He told his gardener to cut it down, rip it out, throw it away, burn it, destroy it, forget that it was ever part of our lives. Let's move on. Let's move past it. Let's move far away from this worthless fig tree. This is a parable about the connection between sin and fate. Sin and fate. The teaching that our failures somehow cause God to punish us with religious desecration or falling towers or fruitless lives. That theology is a barren religious fig tree in a fertile vineyard full of life. The big move is to rip all of religion out, roots and all, and move on as if nothing ever happened. And that's easier than what Jesus' parable proposes. Dig around it. Aerate it. Put manure on it. Bring new life to it. Trust that God will work through it, through us, and through the fertile vineyard. Because buds and blooms will come to that tree. And the fruit of that tree will enhance the world of the vineyard around it. In Jesus' parable, this idea of fate is no longer random, nor is it determined by our failures in Jesus' parable. The fate of the world is determined by how we bring air and oxygen and voice to life, how we dig around, loosen, aerate the soils of the world. The fate of the world is determined by how we fertilize the world, how we allow others to grow, how we encourage one another, how we affirm the gifts in each other, how we see the spark of the divine in each and every person, and how we let people show us the spark of the divine that lives within ourselves. All that work, all that investment is a lot harder than just cutting the tree down and moving far away. Yet Jesus promises to be with us, bringing life and growth and bearing fruit if we will simply aerate and fertilize as we move just down the religious road with him. One last thing. Earlier this week, I told a few of you, and I see a few of you here, I told a few of you that I was tempted to change the sign out in front of our building to read, "This church is manure." That's kind of what we're doing here, people. We are fertilizing the world with affirmation and inclusion and forgiveness and growth and hospitality and abundance and a witness to the spark of God's divine love in all people. St. Paul's is manure for the world and for us. I was tempted to change the sign, but for obvious reasons I did not. But instead, and as sort of a side item, instead, for this Sunday only, you can just tell me that this sermon was manure, and I will take it as a compliment. Amen.